Look closely. Do you see it? It is not the glint of gold or the sparkle of a diamond. It is not the heavy weight of a crown passed down through generations of kings and queens. No, this crown is different. It is unseen, yet it is felt everywhere. It is woven from the threads of countless small actions. A shared meal in a time of hunger. A story whispered to a child to keep a memory alive. A hand reached out to help a neighbor rebuild after a storm. This is the crown of service, the one worn not by a monarch on a throne, but by ordinary people in the quiet corners of their communities. It is a crown that has existed long before the grand palaces and the royal decrees, a silent testament to our shared humanity and our instinct to care for one another. We begin our journey not in a single moment, but across many. Picture this: a flash of time. A woman in a bustling Caribbean market in the 1700s, slipping an extra piece of fruit into the basket of a family struggling to get by. Now, jump forward. A group of dock workers in a foggy London port in the 19th century, pooling their meager wages to support a fallen comrade's widow. Flash again. A young nurse during the Blitz, her face smudged with soot, holding the hand of a frightened stranger in a bomb shelter. And again, to today, 2024. A volunteer in a community hall, patiently teaching an elderly man how to connect with his grandchildren on a video call. Each scene is a single, luminous thread in a vast and beautiful tapestry that stretches across centuries. These are not the moments that are recorded in the official histories. You will not find them in the gilded books that tell the tales of battles won and kingdoms built. They focus on the spectacle of power, the coronations, the jubilees, the royal weddings. But while the world watched the crown of state, another crown was being forged. A crown of compassion, a crown of solidarity. It was built in the shadows, nurtured in secret meetings, and strengthened by the unbreakable bonds of community. This is the story of that other crown, the one that truly belongs to the people. This montage of moments is not just a collection of random good deeds. It is the very heart of our story. It represents a current that has always run parallel to the river of official power. While the monarchy proclaimed its divine right to rule and serve its subjects from above, the people were quietly serving each other from the ground up. This parallel power, this network of mutual aid, did not seek permission. It did not wait for a royal charter. It simply arose from a fundamental need. A need to survive, a need to belong, a need to see the humanity in one another, even when the systems of power tried to render them invisible. This is the origin of the People's Union. To understand the present, we must listen to the echoes of the past. Our story moves like a heartbeat, a steady rhythm that connects yesterday to today. We will travel back and forth through time, feeling the pulse of history in our veins. One moment, we will be standing on the damp earth of a Jamaican plantation, smelling the sweet scent of sugarcane and the bitter tang of injustice. We will hear the hushed whispers of rebellion carried on the night air, the secret songs of freedom that were a lifeline for the enslaved. These were the first, tentative beats of a drum that would one day call for a different kind of allegiance, a loyalty not to a distant monarch, but to each other. Then, with the next beat, we will find ourselves in the smog-filled streets of industrial London. We will witness the rise of factories and the grinding poverty that followed in their wake. Here, in the crowded tenements and noisy union halls, we see the same spirit of mutual support taking a new form. Workers from all corners of the crumbling empire, from Ireland, from India, from the Caribbean, found common cause. They learned that their struggles were connected. The same system that exploited their homelands was now exploiting their labor in the heart of the metropolis. They began to organize, sharing resources, creating support networks, planting the seeds of a formal union. This rhythm of history is crucial, you see. It shows us that nothing happens in isolation. The fight for survival on a colonial plantation and the struggle for fair wages in a London factory are not separate stories. They are chapters in the same book. The legacy of the empire created the conditions for both. The crown's wealth was built on the resources and the people it controlled across the globe. And as people moved and migrated, forced or by choice, they brought their memories, their traditions of resistance, their deep-seated knowledge of community care. The Union was not born in a single day. It was woven from these countless threads of shared experience. So, as we journey together, I want you to feel this pulse. Do not think of time as a straight line, but as a circle, an echo. The lessons learned in one era become the tools for the next. The courage of an ancestor who dared to escape slavery becomes the inspiration for a grandchild who dares to challenge an unjust law. The secret meetings held by candlelight in the 18th century provided the blueprint for the formal charters written in the 20th. This is how movements are built. They are built on memory. They are built on the echoes of those who came before. This is the rhythm of our people, the rhythm that powers the People's Union. At the very core of this long and winding history, there lies a single, powerful question. It is a question that has been asked in moments of great crisis and in times of quiet reflection. It has been whispered in secret and shouted in protest. It is a question forged in the fire of oppression and tempered by the steel of resilience. The question is this: who do we serve? For centuries, the answer from the top was simple, unwavering, clear. Power, wealth, loyalty were meant to flow one way, toward the crown. The monarchy was presented as the ultimate servant of the nation, a symbol of stability and divine order. The people were its loyal subjects, but for millions this official answer rang hollow. How could a crown so far away, insulated by unimaginable wealth and privilege, truly serve a farmer in Barbados, a miner in Wales, a seamstress in East London? Their daily lives told a different story. When a hurricane destroyed their homes, it was not the king who rebuilt. It was their neighbors. When their children went hungry, it was not the queen who provided a meal. It was the community. When they faced discrimination and injustice, it was not the palace that offered protection. It was their own collective strength and organization. That growing disconnect created a deep and lasting tension. The crown offered ceremony. The people needed care. The crown offered spectacle. The people needed support. The crown demanded loyalty. The people demanded justice. The Union was born when people decided they must serve each other. They built their own structures of care. The Union was born when people decided they must serve each other. They built their own structures of care. This question, who do we serve, is not just history, it is living, and we must ask it today on May 24th, 2024. We live with dazzling royal weddings and televised jubilees, and we also live with food banks, housing crises, communities struggling with neglect. The People's Union reminds us of that duality. It challenges us to look beyond spectacle. It asks where true power and service lie, in ancient rituals of monarchy, or in everyday acts of civic care that bind us together. This is the question our story will explore. Now, you may be wondering who I am, this voice guiding you through the currents of time. My name is SERAPHINA. I am a daughter of the Caribbean. I am a child of the Empire. I am a storyteller by trade. I am a storyteller by heart. My accent carries the warmth of the island sun and the rhythm of the ocean waves. But my story is also rooted in the cold, hard soil of Britain. I carry the history of both places within me. My ancestors were brought to the islands in chains. Their labor built the wealth that financed the grandeur of London. Generations later, my parents came to Britain seeking opportunity, finding welcome and finding hostility. I am not a historian in a university, nor am I a politician in Parliament. I am a keeper of stories. My grandmother, her hands wrinkled from a lifetime of work, was my first teacher. She did not teach me dates and names from a textbook. She taught me history through the taste of the food she cooked, through the cadence of the proverbs she recited, and through the tales of the people she remembered. She taught me that our history is not dead and buried in the past. It is a living thing we carry with us. It is in our blood, in our memories, and in the choices we make every single day. This story of the People's Union is not just an abstract account of an organization. It is my story. It is your story. It is our story. It is the story of how our ancestors, our grandparents, and our parents learned to rely on each other when the systems of power failed them. I am a member of the Union, as was my mother before me, and her father before her. The Union's history is my family's history. The principles of the Union, of service, of solidarity, of community care, are the principles my grandmother taught me. They are the values that have guided our people through the darkest of times. So I invite you to join me. Let us walk this path together. Let us listen to the echoes of the past and ask the hard questions of the present. This is not just a documentary you are watching. It is an inheritance. It is a call to remember where we came from and to decide where we are going. Through the triumphs and the heartbreaks, the secret meetings and the public stands, we will uncover the story of how a people, armed with little more than their own courage and their compassion, built a new kind of institution. An institution that rose beyond the crown to create a crown of its own, a crown of service, worn by all. This is the story of the People's Union. The sun never sets on suffering. The story of the British Empire was often told with a proud boast. The sun never sets on it. From the Caribbean islands to the shores of India, to the vast plains of Africa, to the ports of Asia. For the Crown in London, this was a symbol of immense power, of civilizing missions, and of a global dominion blessed by God. It represented an endless day of influence and control. But for the millions living under that flag, the saying had a much darker meaning. For them, the sun never set on their suffering. It was a constant, glaring reminder of their subjugation, an eternal daylight illuminating their toil and their pain. In the colonies, life was dictated by the needs of an empire thousands of miles away. The land itself was reshaped to serve the crown's appetite. Lush forests were cleared, sugar plantations, cotton fields, tea terraces. The very rhythm of life was no longer governed by local seasons or traditions, but by the relentless schedule of planting and harvesting for export. The people were seen not as communities with their own rich histories and cultures, but as resources. Hands to work the fields, bodies to fill the mines, subjects to be taxed. This was the fundamental truth of colonial life, a reality far removed from the glorious pageantry displayed in London. The power of the crown was a daily physical presence. It was the overseer's whip cracking in the humid air, a sound that promised pain for any who faltered. It was the colonial administrator in his starched white suit, holding the power of life and death in his decrees. It was the soldier with his rifle, a constant silent threat meant to enforce order and quell any thought of dissent. This power was designed to be absolute, to break the spirit, and to ensure that the wealth generated by the land and its people flowed in only one direction, back to the heart of the empire, enriching a monarchy that most would never even see. And so, the people learned to live in the shadow of this power. They learned the art of survival under a system that was designed to crush them. They bent, but they did not break. They endured the hardship, the humiliation, and the heartache. But beneath the surface of compliance, something else was stirring. A different kind of power was being nurtured, not in the grand government houses, but in the cramped slave quarters and humble villages. It was a power born not of force and fear, but of shared experience and a deep, unspoken understanding that their survival depended entirely on one another. The sun may have never set on their suffering, but the darkness of night offered a precious cover for hope to take root. Let us travel to the Caribbean islands, the jewels in the Crown's colonial empire. From a distance, they were a paradise. Postcard images of white sand beaches, turquoise waters. But this beauty was a facade, a sugar-coated cage. The wealth that made these islands so desirable was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. The sweet scent of boiling sugar cane filled the air day and night. It was inseparable from the bitter stench of human bondage. Every barrel of sugar, every cask of rum, and the ships that carried them to England were stained with the blood, sweat, and tears of a people. This was the engine of the empire. The enslaved were its fuel. Life on a sugar plantation was a relentless cycle from sunup to sundown, cutting the tough cane with heavy machetes under a blistering sun, feeding the stalks into powerful, unforgiving grinding mills. There was no respite, no sick days, no retirement. People were treated as property, listed in ledgers alongside cattle and equipment. Families torn apart at auction, sold to different estates, never to see each other again. The system stripped away identity, names, languages, religions, humanity. The Crown's authority was absolute here. Laws served to protect slave owners' property, not people. Acts of defiance, working too slowly, speaking one's native tongue, or looking an overseer in the eye for too long, could be met with savage punishment. The whip, the branding iron, the stocks. This constant terror ensured obedience and maximized profit. A system of calculated cruelty, built to snuff out rebellion before it spread. Yet even in this sugar-coated cage, the human spirit refused to be extinguished. Masters could own bodies, but not minds or souls. In brief moments of rest, in the quiet of night, people held on to who they were. They created a new culture, a fusion of African traditions and Caribbean realities. They developed creoles the masters could not understand. They told stories of Anansi the spider, the clever trickster. These acts of cultural survival were acts of defiance. They declared that even in chains, they were still human, still a community, still a people. In a world where everything was designed to divide and control, the simple act of sharing food became a revolutionary practice. On the plantations, rations were meager, often just enough to keep a person working, but never enough to feel truly nourished. Hunger was a constant companion, another tool of control used by the masters. In this environment of enforced scarcity, one might expect people to hoard what little they had, to look out only for themselves. But more often than not, the opposite happened. The community understood that individual survival was tied to collective well-being. A secret network of care began to form around the cooking pot. When someone was too sick to work and was denied their ration, a neighbor would secretly share a portion of their own small meal. A woman who tended a hidden garden patch behind her cabin, yams, greens, would distribute the harvest among those with young children, ensuring the next generation had a bit more to eat. These were not grand gestures. They were small, almost invisible acts of solidarity. But in a system that treated people as less than human, sharing a meal was a powerful affirmation of each other's worth. It was a way of saying, I see you. Your hunger is my hunger. We are in this together. This practice of sharing was more than just about physical sustenance. It was about nourishing the soul of the community. The cooking fire became a central point for connection. Around it, news was exchanged in hushed tones. Grievances were aired. Elders would pass down knowledge, recipes, herbal remedies for common ailments, learned and remembered from their African homelands. These gatherings, disguised as simple meal preparations, were the first, most basic form of community organizing. They reinforced the bonds of kinship and trust that the slave system actively tried to destroy. The shared pot was a symbol of a different kind of economy, one based on mutual care, not profit. These traditions of communal eating and food sharing became a cornerstone of the people's resilience. They were a practical solution to a life-threatening problem, but they were also a deeply political act. By creating their own system of distribution, they were subverting the master's control. They were building a community that looked inward for support, relying on its own members rather than the institution that oppressed them. This instinct to feed one another, to ensure no one starved while others had a little to spare, was the most most fundamental expression of a union. It was the first essential service provided by the people, for the people. While the official history of the empire was being written down in London, in leather-bound books and parliamentary records, the people were creating their own archive, you know. This archive was not made of paper and ink. It was living, breathing, and oral. It was carried in whispers on the wind, in the lyrics of songs sung in the fields, in the stories told to children by moonlight. These were the secret keepers, the griots, the elders, the storytellers, who held the community's memory in their minds and on their tongues. Their task was one of immense importance, to ensure that the people knew who they were and where they came from, even when the world told them they were nothing. These stories were a lifeline to a past the colonial powers sought to erase. Tales were told of African kings and queens, of vibrant cultures, of complex societies. These were not just fairy tales, they were history lessons, reminders of a time before chains, a time of dignity and freedom. By keeping these memories alive, the storytellers fought the psychological warfare of slavery, which taught that Black people had no history worth remembering. The stories were an act of mental and spiritual resistance, a way of building pride and identity, able to withstand the daily degradation of plantation life. They were a shield for the soul. The secret keepers also served a practical purpose. They were the community's newspaper and its intelligence network. Information was the most valuable currency among the oppressed. News of a planned rebellion on a neighboring island, the name of a particularly cruel overseer, the location of a hidden path to freedom. All this was passed along through carefully coded language, embedded in songs and stories. A song about a bird flying north could be a signal about the Underground Railroad. A story about a clever rabbit escaping a fox could contain instructions for a planned escape. This was how people communicated, right under the noses of their captors. This oral tradition was the invisible thread that wove the community together. It created a shared consciousness, a collective understanding of their struggle and their hopes. It ensured that the lessons learned from one generation's resistance were not lost to the next. The courage of a rebel who was caught and executed was preserved in a song, becoming an inspiration for future generations. The names of those who had successfully escaped to freedom were whispered with reverence, becoming legends. This living library of stories, songs, and secrets was the foundation upon which a more organized movement would eventually be built. It was the first charter of the People's Union, written not on parchment, but on the heart. On the one day of the week when the enslaved were sometimes allowed a few hours for themselves, the market square became the center of their world. Officially, it was a place to sell or trade small surplus from personal plots, crafts they had made. Sanctioned by colonial authorities, a harmless outlet to keep the local economy churning. But for the people, the market was so much more. Their parliament, their newsroom, their social club. One of the few places to gather in numbers, a vibrant, noisy, colorful expression of community. Here, amidst haggling over yams, chickens, woven baskets, the real business of the day took place. People from different plantations could mix and talk, away from overseers' surveillance. They exchanged information, caught up on news of sold-away relatives, shared warnings of crackdowns, celebrated small victories. A web of communication, connecting disparate communities, building shared identity beyond a single estate. A few precious hours to feel part of a larger whole. A stage for cultural survival and expression. Bright head wraps, Creole languages and cadence, spices and foods recalling a homeland. A quiet rebellion against plantation uniformity. A place to perform identity, to be themselves outside the master's gaze. Musicians played drums. Forbidden rhythms spoke the heart's language. Sorrow, resilience, hope. A celebration of life the system tried to stamp out. Here the first sparks of organized action ignited. Pooling money to buy a loved one's freedom. Agreeing to slow work in protest, knowing glances and coded phrases. A training ground for leadership and negotiation. learning to build consensus, mediating disputes, organizing small-scale collective action. Politics in its rawest, most essential form. The market square parliament, no official power, where people began to learn self-governance. Long before any formal charters were written, the first threads of the Union were woven through small, secret acts of mutual financial support. In a world where people were themselves considered capital, the concept of money was fraught with danger and possibility. While the enslaved were denied wages, they found ingenious ways to participate in an underground economy. They sold crafts, they raised chickens, they cultivated small garden plots. The meager coins they earned were not just for themselves. They were often seen as a resource for the entire community, a tool for collective liberation. One of the most common and powerful forms of this mutual aid was the susu or partner system. This rotating savings and credit association was a tradition brought over from Africa and adapted to the New World. A small group of people would agree to contribute a fixed sum of money to a central pot on a regular basis, perhaps every week or every month. Each time the money was collected, the entire sum would be given to one member of the group. This would continue until every person had received their hand. It was a system built entirely on trust, as there were no legal contracts or ways to enforce the agreement. Your word was your bond. The susu was a lifeline. It allowed people to accumulate a lump sum of money that would have been impossible to save individually. This money could be used for life-altering purposes. It might be used to buy a pig or a goat, providing a new source of food and income. It might be used to purchase better tools to make their work a little easier. But most powerfully, it was sometimes used to purchase freedom. A community would pool its resources for years, hand after hand, until enough money was saved to buy a person, often a child or an elder, out of bondage. This was a direct, tangible blow against the system of slavery, paid for by the people themselves. This practice was the embryonic form of a credit union, a community bank, and a social welfare system all in one. It taught invaluable lessons in financial management, collective responsibility, and long-term planning. It demonstrated that by pooling their tiny resources, the powerless could generate real power. They were creating their own economic system, one based on solidarity rather than exploitation. Each coin passed from hand to hand, each successful payout, was a stitch in a growing fabric of interdependence. These were the first threads of the People's Union, woven in secret, strengthened by trust, and dedicated to the simple, radical goal of buying back their own lives.